Hello. Have you ever been handed a legacy and wondered what you were supposed to do with it? Not just inherited it, but expanded it, shaped it, make it mean something for the next generation? Well, today we're going to be talking to someone who's done just that. So, my name is Bennett Santana, and welcome to the Goldmine Business Academy podcast, where we help purpose driven entrepreneurs never give up and always build up and help them rebuild their businesses with faith, systems, and purpose. I've been in business for over 30 years and I lost everything and had to rebuild it twice. One summer, I made over 2,800 calls trying to rebuild the business, trying to survive. I pushed myself so much that I ended up losing my voice. I injured my larynx, but I didn't quit. I found a better way. And I want to help you do the same. And so today we have Michael Angel, grew up surrounded by legacy, and he chose to build with vision and creativity and service. From a global business roots to the quiet power of philanthropy and the arts, Michael has spent his life funding, founding, and fostering what others couldn't see yet. And so today's episode, we're talking about how to create what doesn't exist yet. We're talking about how to turn no's into new opportunities and how to stay grounded while building something that lasts. And whether you're building or rebuilding or barely holding it all together, this conversation is going to help you unlock the gold that's in your mind and your mission. And so let's dive in. Michael, I want to thank you for joining me here
Pleasure to be
today.
here, Bennett. Thanks so much for the invite.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it. So let's begin at the foundation. You're connected to the legacy of Newlyweds Foods, right? It's a company that grew from a single dessert, and Newlyweds was a combination of ice cream and a cake. It was a marriage that was made in heaven, right? And it actually took off here in Chicago. So can you tell us about the company, how the company started, and what you observed growing up around it?
The company started actually in the early 80s, and the ice cream cake roll was something that I think was something that someone in Detroit or someplace in Michigan, where my grandfather was from, Paul M. Angel was from. He came to Chicago, started the company, and it ended up growing into other areas that ended up being amazing opportunity areas in breading, batter mixes, and now it's spices and English muffins. They bought out a company that made English muffins. I grew up in the 60s, and my grandfather was still involved then. My father took over the company slowly over time, eventually in the late 70s. And so it was a presence in the family.
So how old was your dad when he took over the business? So your grandfather started it?
Yes, my grandfather started it in, I think it's 32.
And how many kids did he have?
Oh, 9.
9.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was a big family.
And your dad,
Yeah.
where was he in the among his siblings?
Yeah, he was, I think, number 6. The 4 girls were first.
Okay.
And then he was the second of 5 boys. He started working again at the company in 1965 when my family moved here from Philadelphia, where I was born. And so that was 15 years. He was working in various capacities and production and sales and finance. He was treasurer before he was CEO.
Did he start in the factory? Where would he have started?
All those 9 kids had something to do when they were like in high school. Either in the office or in the factory or sweeping up, or it was all started with the production, the manufacturing. No one started.
That would have been fantastic. And the factory is here in Chicago, correct?
There are a lot of factories.
Where your family was at.
But that was Pulaski and Fullerton, what's now known as Hermosa. And and that's where I worked when I worked a few years there for the family business, mostly in summers. But it was a presence. A lot of different family members were involved. You knew about the product. You knew about the competition. You knew about where the company was going, different products. And in working at the plant ourselves, various family members got an appreciation for different kinds of people. I got to know people who had Latin American heritage and actually also Polish heritage. Hermosa is an interesting area that way.
So what was your first job there?
Yeah.
Your very first, let's say, assignment, mission, not official job, but what was your first introduction?
Well, I didn't really have a job before I actually worked there, and that was on the cake line. By the time I started working there, which was around let me see, 80,
Mhm.
81. They didn't make the whole cake roll. They made sheets of chocolate cake that then were sent out to local dairies like Dean's or Borden's, um, Meadowgold. And anyway, so I was on the cake line and I worked near the end of the cake line where they were coming down a cooling belt and packed them in a box with paper dividers between
And you
each
were
one.
16, 18, or
I was, yeah, about 15, 16.
oh, that sounds exciting for a young person to be on the line.
Was actually it was the same thing over and over and over again. It could be monotonous,
Yeah.
but it's work, and it was, working for a paycheck and being around
Mhm.
people who are doing the same thing.
Imagine the folks working around you. It's like we have the boss's son here at the end of the line. Get
Maybe.
you the quality picked up.
I don't think so. They were accustomed to seeing the other family members in the plant,
Oh, they were. Okay.
and um, I I hope they were at ease. Part of being the owner's son is what you do with that.
Hmm.
If you make a big deal out of that, then you put people off. If you're just there doing your best, doing your part, then it's way more relaxed.
Yeah. No, I think that's the purpose in the design that your dad, you could have been in the office, emptying, trash cans, but no, he put you on the line to get a handle of the.
Actually, I would not have been qualified to do the sanitation work because those are people who do very specific things and
Yeah.
have training that
Yeah.
I didn't have, actually.
Oh yeah, no, I understand. So what I'm saying is that he could have put you in the office, but he put you on the line to get you, connected, seeing the manufacturing process, the folks, the people in there.
Absolutely. I moved to the office later, not in any kind of leadership position, but
Mhm.
in accounting and clerical positions.
But I just to let you know, at 12 years old, I actually worked cleaning at the assessor's office, ashtrays, and that was my first real job. So
Right?
I'm just kind of relating what I actually did.
Was that downtown?
It was in Gary, Indiana.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so yeah, so that was my first job at 12 years old. So as you were working as a young man in that particular job, what values or principles from that legacy has stayed with you till now?
Essentially hard work, showing up on time, having the right attitude, not being too big for your britches. Is that the saying? And knowing what the expectations are, knowing that people are relying on you to do your bit, because if you don't do it, then the next thing down the line that's slowed down or messed up, and just putting the nose to the grindstone and getting the work done.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So you mentioned, well, we were dialoguing that you said create the things that you just don't see yet. That's visionary leadership. Where did you get that mindset from?
I've
Yeah,
always
how did that start out? Just
I've always been fairly creative. From an early age, I listened a lot, but I also created my own little tunes,
Mhm.
then learned how to write them down. I was accused of being a bit of a daydreamer when the world seemed limited or kind of dark or tedious.
So
I
let
would go in my mind and in my ears and in my thoughts and create the world that way.
so let's say how did you choose the career that you got into? How did you choose you're a composer,
Yeah.
you're a musician. How did you choose? Can you bring us up to
Sure.
speed from when you were working at Newlywed and then, kind of bring us through where you're at now?
Well, actually, my parents told me when I was very young that I was musical, which is something I didn't really notice. And then I was given instruments to play. I was a player, and only in high school did I start really writing music more seriously. When it came time for college, making a decision about college, I really couldn't figure out what I wanted to do that made sense. And then one of my relatives said, "Well, it's obvious, music. I mean, that's what
Mhm.
you're always doing. What's the question?" I didn't even really know the answer then.
Mhm.
So then I enrolled in a conservatory, the Oberlin College Conservatory in Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, and studied music composition and performance, trumpet performance. I did both, double major.
So, just getting back a little to the part where others saw your gifts, I think there's like a prophetic voice that kind of rings out in young people that, like, I found like successful, let's say, doctors. They'll say, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but, my mom said I'd be good at this. And it seemed like there was a kind of a prophetic voice that sort of, in a sense, shaped and it was from others, right?
Yes, that's a very good point, and I think it takes the objectivity of someone who's not yourself to look at you and say,
Mm-hmm.
this is what we notice, this is what you are. It's similar to people hearing a recording of their voice and not recognizing it and saying,
Mm-hmm.
I sound like that,
Yeah.
because we're in the middle of the thing that's making the sound. Unless you're a singer or in a position like an announcer where you hear yourself recorded regularly, you don't know it. Same thing with, I think, aptitudes and gifts and where you are, what you've been doing, what your talents are. It takes the objectivity of someone else
To see it, right?
to be with. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one thing I deal with a lot of young people, and I'll kind of speak into their lives. I'm like, hey, I think you'd be good at this, but somehow the folks around you saw you, they saw how you worked, and they said, but making a leap into music, right? And then having the talent, how did they make that match? Were you musical as a young person, or did you learn that develop in college? Where did that come from?
I can't put my finger on an exact moment. I was always either singing things or repeating. I could repeat back either commercials or tunes I heard on the radio pretty
Oh, okay.
quickly. If I heard it, I could do it. And I guess that's what they saw. Then it was a matter of picking an instrument. Okay, trumpet.
And when did you pick that instrument?
Fourth grade. So I was
Fourth grade,
about,
okay.
what, 8? And it went from there, just one thing after another, more experiences, more ensembles, teachers. I was fortunate to have private lessons, private music lessons, which anyone in the arts will tell you private lessons is crucial.
But too, like for instance, I played second violin in high school to give you an idea, and I learned how to read music, and that was applicable to my knowledge of computers now because of the detail.
Absolutely.
So that development, do you see yourself that you could get into the detail, that music, that attention to detail, that it gives you the ability to pay attention to the details now in life?
Yes, it's interesting because later on I would have to teach music myself. In college, I would teach music theory and ear training and a number of different things. Learning to read music, as you mentioned, it deals a whole lot with executive functioning, seeing a whole bunch of different symbols, reading ahead, knowing how to go from there to understand what's required of you to make a given sound, make that sound while all the time reading ahead and ahead. It's like reading English or Spanish or French or Russian or whatever. It's just a different set of marks. But executive functioning, figuring out how to do a number of things in concert to get it done, it's challenging. So that's the case. Now, you mentioned about playing second violin. That was me too. Although it was trumpet, often I was, and this is something else the arts does, I think better than possibly anything else, being a member of a team, a member of an ensemble. I spent a lot of time playing second trumpet because I've definitely not always been the best guy in the room. But you have to know how to, again, know what's expected of you, follow the leader of your section leader or the conductor, do it right away without question. Be a good team member. That's how you learn. That's a critical skill no matter what you're doing in life, no matter what kind of a team it is.
I went for, they have these awards, high school awards. Actually, it was junior high. And the teacher had me memorize the whole song, playing the violin. And at the last minute, she goes, you could read it if you want from the music sheet. And I was ready. I had it perfect down by memory. But at the last moment, she hands me the sheet and I messed up. And I don't know if you've ever had an experience like that, but.
So you learned it by ear first?
No, I read the music, memorized the music,
Yeah.
played it. But at the last moment, she goes, now you could just, if you don't feel confident in yourself, you could read it off the, music sheet. And then I did, and I messed up. I remember it was like, that was a big lesson. Never doubt yourself.
Oh, okay. Yes.
In other words, she put doubt in the last moment, and then I struck out. It was like, I learned from that moment, never doubt yourself. Do you ever have any experiences like that as you're playing music?
You know what? I was not much of a soloist. And so I almost always had the music in front of me. Even when playing a soloist, I had it in front of me. Even when conducting, even when I knew what I needed to do and that thing was a barrier, that piece of but in terms of self-doubt, yeah, early on when one learns a given piece of music or, say, a computer application or a process in business or manufacturing, you have to learn that, and you can't have the same confidence or even cockiness that you do after you've mastered everything. It's all part of the growth process. It's nothing to be feared. It's something to be worked through and and used.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's bring you up to speed from where you were at in college, in music, and then let's kind of take your career. What was your next major career step
Okay,
after
well,
college?
right. I finished at the University of Michigan in 1993. I was hired by them as an adjunct teacher that was teaching computer music classes, something I learned late in my studies because, frankly, I thought it would help me get a job. Well, then it did, and then I really had to be an expert at it. I was hired by the University of Alabama at Birmingham to do a couple things mainly, teach computer music classes for a new music tech curriculum, degree program, and also teach music theory, writing, analyzing, and ear training,
Okay.
ear skills. They call it oral skills.
And then how long were you there for?
That was 14 years. That was
Wow.
1994 to 2008. Good job, good people, made a lot of friends, made a lot of good things happened in my career. Joining a growing department. It went from a small to a medium-sized department. Very dedicated people. I wasn't really necessarily expecting to find myself in the Deep South. In my job search, I decided I'd be open-minded and think about anywhere, maybe not necessarily the Deep South. Well, then the hands of fate said, "Oh yeah, here's this." But they hired me. They were kind enough to hire me right, a year out of college after I was that adjunct position in Michigan. And there are great people doing great things everywhere. It's not always downtown in a big city. It's not only at places like Juilliard or wherever great music is, Paris, Amsterdam, London. There were a lot of really good, talented musicians, artists, writers, people in Birmingham, things a lot of people don't know. I learned a lot.
I love Birmingham. I've been down there with my wife. I've been to the museum, the Rosa Raymond Parks Museum, or what's it? It's a civil rights.
When I was there, it was called Civil Rights
Rights
Museum.
Museum.
That's great. There's a wonderful museum of art right downtown. There's a great food scene there, and not just barbecue, although everyone's got their favorite barbecue place as well. But there's fine like fusion Southern French stuff and Italian. Best Northern Italian food I've had outside of Italy. Birmingham. Best Thai food.
It was an amazing place when I went there. Well, then bring us up to speed. What was the next career move after that?
Well, okay, there were a lot happened at Birmingham. I did a lot of teaching, I did a lot of writing, and formed a organization called the Birmingham Art Music Alliance, whose acronym is BAMA. Kind of a funny little play on the football team, right? But again, that was what had happened. That was a new music organization to help composers, classical composers in the area, have a place, venues for their works. Because I was writing a lot and getting performances all sorts of places in the country. I was doing a lot of traveling, but not so much there. I met my colleagues at 3 other institutions, fellow composers, and said, guys, shall we form a concert series where we can present our own works, bring in guest composers, performers, and work together? And they were all game, and it worked. That was 1995 was our first season, and it's still going now. So that's
wow, congratulations.
30th anniversary is coming right up.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that was a tremendous building experience. Finding my friends, finding my colleagues, working together, not so much in competition, but although competition is good, but realizing that we were doing things in isolation when we could forge a real scene from what we were all doing and having a series that was in all of our spaces. It went from a bunch of people who are siloed to a real scene. That was a great, I'm proud of that, and made a lot of great friends and colleagues.
And produced a lot of fruit, especially for the city, right? It's a cultural impact that you had.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
I do like to think so. And maybe more people will realize that here's a part of the city that they didn't realize was there. So anyway, you asked what happened later. 8, my wife and I moved from there. We both had positions at the university. Our kids were getting ready to start school. We ended up deciding on Washington, D.C. for the next place. It had some good career opportunities for her. It was an interesting place for me and for the kids to grow up. A lot of culture, some good education. And also I had a couple of family members there. I liked being close to them. And so that was 2008. Here's the thing. I spent 2 years as a stay-at-home dad.
And how old were your kids?
Oh, when we moved there, they were 3 and 5.
Wow.
They were quite young.
You were taking care of them when they were 3 and 5?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
We had help from someone else, but I was I was there for them, and it was a great thing.
Mm.
You know, it was
I had something similar. So when my business in 2008, went down, I worked 4 days for 4 hours a day.
yeah,
So I would pick up my daughters and we would go to the movies,
wonderful.
go have café con leche somewhere. And they still remember it. And it was
Yeah.
like, it was just a perfect down period. It's not many people could have that opportunity to spend, hey, you're going to take care of your kids. And then actually I took care of my brother-in-law's kids too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
They still remember and so that's a real connection that's never forgotten with your family.
And I can tell by the way you're smiling when you say that you savor that, you love that.
Yeah.
And it was down, but you were on. I could tell you have to be on when you're
Right, absolutely. Yeah. So
that part of your role.
so then Washington, D.C., you were there how long?
I'm still actually there, but that was 2008. And so that's,
Okay.
what's that, 17 years now?
You have a home there still?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Eventually, soon we're going to be relocating back to Chicago.
Okay.
I haven't actually lived here since the mid 80s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I always think you're just a local for some reason.
I still feel like I'm a local.
Yeah, no, because you're involved in the events here.
Well, I've had a place here for about 7 years, and I've got a lot of friends, a lot of family here. With the foundation, I ended up doing a lot of work here and reconnecting with the city in a way that I hadn't before as a child and as a youth. I grew up in the suburbs, but I was energized by downtown. I was taking the L downtown or up to Addison Street on what is now the Red Line to Wrigley Field on the weekends whenever I could. But anyway, I'm a Midwesterner. That's never changed. I could live in the deep South. I could work there, work on the East Coast. I've been there.
And obviously you have some family roots here. So,
absolutely.
So, all right. So then what, career-wise, what happened next?
Okay. So at that point, it was 2010, my father decided to take some of the proceeds from the family business and invest it in a philanthropic endeavor. And that's where the Paul M. Angel Family Foundation began. Started.
And how old was your dad at that time?
Let me think. 2011 was, he'd hit 60 anyway. Let's see. He was 70.
70.
Yeah.
Is he still alive?
No, he died a couple of years ago, December.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
How old was he?
He was 81, I think.
Okay.
And he had an illness that developed in that spring. And where were we? 2025? That was 2022.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about your mom?
She's still around. She still lives in Oak Park.
Oh, yeah. How old is she?
84, still going,
Wow.
still going strong. She had her own career. She was in education. She was a junior high school librarian. So, both my parents worked. They were both, there for me and supportive of me, and I had a good home life.
You think you got your attention to detail from your mom?
Both of them.
Both of them were very detailed?
Yeah.
Because obviously when you think of a librarian, there's that detailed, reading, cognitive. Was she like that?
Both of them were big readers.
They were?
Yeah. Both of them loved music. They weren't performers themselves, but they were great lovers. They would go to lyric opera. They would go to plays. They loved the folk music.
Like bluegrass? Not
so much bluegrass, but urban folk, like Earl of Old Town. The Old Town North Side musicians from the 60s and 70s. Okay. So I would go during the Sunday afternoon family sets and hear John Prine and the likes of Steve Goodman, for those of your listeners who may still remember, Ed Holstein, who's still around.
You probably put those together on a YouTube track. Because when you say folk music, a lot of people, they wouldn't have imagined the names that you mentioned.
There was kind of an urban folk renewal in the 60s that came out of, I think, the legacy of Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, and Chicago was a hub for that. And there were some big, big names. Any of you who go to or turn on the Cubs games, and if the Cubs happen to win and you hear "Go Cubs Go," that was written by Steve Goodman, who also wrote City of New Orleans.
Really?
That Arlo Guthrie made a big hit out of. But that was his. He was a great folk musician and urban folk about life in the city.
Oh, you're now giving me an iceberg. Dive into that subject alone. And so then your dad gave you a call.
We were all a bunch of us were around at dinner. There were a few different events. I think actually the first one was at his house, and he started discussing this, that he wanted to do something to provide some benefits to Chicagoans. He liked the idea of young people making good decisions in their lives, finishing their educations. He wanted to do something with human services that way. I said, well, and he said, do you want to be involved with it? I said, well, the only thing I really know is the arts, specifically music. Yeah. And so my area within the foundation programmatically was performing arts.
So do you think you were in his design? Maybe he had that in his head from the very beginning?
No, that specifically would be that.
No, that sometimes I always think parents actually have a long-term plan. In a sense, they were always thinking about my daughter's skill sets and then how to employ them. I'm just asking, do you think your dad probably, when you were younger, made a connection that said maybe you'd be good at supporting the arts here in Chicago?
That wasn't, no, that wasn't something that was a theme early on. And at no point did he turn and point and say, you're going to do this with your life. I didn't have that
no, but it was kind of it would.
I think
I never, just to let you know, I never tell my daughters to do anything. They sort of just kind of get magnetized to her. It's the thought of that, having that idea to help the city, having to feel that giving heart to want to make an impact in the city, and then saying, you know what, I have someone in my family that has that discernment, has that ability to think like they think.
I see.
It made that connection. I'm just saying.
Well, philanthropy, maybe not specifically. When he saw what I was doing in high school, especially one concert where I conducted the orchestra, I think he realized he's really professionally talented. What was expected of us was to do well, get good grades. Didn't have to be straight A. I wasn't straight A. I was maybe at best a B+ student. Be educated, go to college. That was a given because that's, they did that and they wanted to see us have education at least as much as they did. And to find some kind of purpose, find whatever we wanted. We didn't have a lot of heart-to-hearts about this. We had pretty free range in college to find by the time I went to college, I already knew I was going to be in music. It was a conservatory thing. But throughout high school and college, we had free reign to discover who we were. And in terms of giving back, however, and helping those we're involved with, that goes back a couple generations. I think my father's being an employer of a lot of people meant that he saw a lot of different sort of lives, saw that work was a big part of that, and that he could assist people in certain ways. He had the model of his father, who founded the company, who was, in the best sense, paternal of his workers, especially going back in the early days and before before it became unionized, especially. My grandfather would help people out in a quiet way, sometimes a little bit of cash, maybe a loan, sometimes bailing people out of jail, maybe advice, give someone a job or move them to a different position that they'd be doing. At some point, the organization, the labor did unionize, and there was a strike, and that hurt his feelings a little bit. He felt like there was a family connection that was a little bit lost, or at least questioned. Maybe that's just part of the life cycle. But in any event, the idea that you work with someone, you employ someone, you can be there for them in any of a number of ways. That kind of helpfulness within some kind of community, I think that was a legacy thing that I learned from them both.
And then that got passed on to your dad, and then your dad said, was having a dialogue, hey, I want to do that now for the city.
Yes.
And
that was 2011. And so I'd already had, a career and was...
Well, fine, yeah. But then somehow you raised your hand.
He brought it up. He says, here's what I want to do. Do you guys want to be a part of this? And I said, oh, sure. Because it's one thing in order to create your own music and help other people with their own stuff. But when you are put in a position where you can help other people's careers, organizations, and fields with cash, with money, with that kind of support, that was something that I didn't have the ability to do before.
But in a sense, you were on the other side of it. You saw the academic side of it. In a sense, you got a chance to be in the end user shoes.
Absolutely. I'd been a performer. I'd been a composer, a conductor. I'd co-formed the Bama group. I knew what those challenges were. And that's crucial, I think, in philanthropy. You can't really make the best decisions unless you know what the other person is going through. There really has to be expertise of what they're doing, and be able to not just empathize but sympathize with their challenges and celebrate their victories, both.
Well, that's why I always say there's an element of destiny, right, in there, because for me it sounds like a perfect match, right? It's
Maybe
like without
so.
of your
Yeah.
background in music, and then you get into that. That doesn't happen every day. That's a very unique combination that you could empathize with the end user, understand that theater point of view or music point of view, performance point of view, and yet you've switched roles. It's a
Wait, it was a choice.
yeah,
Destiny, technically, classically, destiny is something that you can't either help or resist. It's going to happen no matter what
yeah.
you do. But there were definitely decisions along the way. I had to decide to focus on certain things. I had to decide, okay, I'm not going to go partying around and certain kinds of self-destructive things that people get into. I'm going to channel my thought, my energy a
Well,
certain
and in
way.
the music industry, that's a big challenge, right? For the performers, right?
Making those decisions, well, it is a big challenge. I mean, it's a tough business.
Yes.
And any business is tough. Let's be honest. Being in the restaurant business, being in I don't know, manufacturing, service
Sure.
business. There's competition. There are economic challenges. There are all sorts of things. In the arts, there has to be talent. It has to be fostered and nurtured from early on. And then there are all sorts of pitfalls that can put you off the track. There's the metaphor of a highway on a career, and this can apply to any career. There are certain ways to get on the road, on-ramps. Then there are certain things that can mess you up on your way to where it is you're trying to get. It's a great metaphor because there can be accidents, and you got to steer clear of those. There are dangers. You can't drive too fast. There are destructive personal things that can put you off the highway in a fast way.
But in a sense, this person who understands those things could, who's had that exposure, who understands it. That's the perspective. I think the downfalls, right?
That's right.
In our case, we see very creative people. Some are creative and they could sustain a living. Some are very creative and can't sustain a living, right?
Yeah.
Some that are very creative and may have an issue, with some, issue with substance. We see and we support and we pray for all these folks, and we see it on this side of it because it is it's not like you're going to go work for someone. You're going to be a nurse and have a track. You go to nursing school and then you go track to go to a hospital. You work and so forth. That's not in this field. It's not
necessarily that simple. You're
right.
Absolutely right, Bennett. Everyone's got challenges. I've had challenges, but having been in the business, and this is the best part of philanthropy, it's not just the money. It's advising people who are in that space, in that place that you've been. And not only that, with grant making, you see a whole lot of organizations. You see a whole lot of iterations that one person in one job in one organization doesn't necessarily know about, doesn't necessarily have that broad view. Being in philanthropy gives one the luxury of the view of seeing a whole bunch of different kinds of similar organizations, whether it's arts education, like the Miracle Center, and services, or a chamber ensemble or a opera company. Having not just the cash to put forth, but also the perspective of knowing what other people are doing out there. I've been able to help organizations that way, including putting organizations together, putting heads together to figure out what to do systemically within a system of groups.
And so your reputation precedes you in that area for sure. I've heard your name mentioned by my wife many, many years ago. She's always held you in such a high esteem.
I hold her in high esteem. Yeah. It's tremendous what she's done.
And the type of person, even the words that she mentioned about being humble, these are things this is a reputation. In other words, the work that you've done, although I'm not very directly familiar with it, you could just kind of hear what's on the street, so to speak. Right?
Yeah.
And so from the foundation standpoint, how long were you there at the foundation there?
That was also 14 years.
14 years.
It seems to be 14 years.
So this is interesting because it's like you had a I always look at these, and I don't know what your thoughts about these cycles of 7 and 14 years, but I've seen that happen in my own life, these cycles of 14 years, right?
For me, it was cars. I would like a car would last me 7 years.
Yeah,
Now with a job, it's 14.
Yeah, and
you
it's
may have
interesting.
something there, Bennett.
Yeah, no, because I looked at, in 2008, when the market studied it, and I said, how long are we going to be depressed from a real estate standpoint? And I looked at like Los Angeles, and it was like 14 years till recovery. And that's exactly what happened in Chicago. It took 14 years before things went back up again. And it's just like, but I share that because life is about cycles, ups and downs.
That's right. And, people talk about this with investing. It's that same in business and life as well. Can't, when it's hits a really bad down spot like 2008, you can't get out of the market then. Otherwise, you lock in your losses. You can't stop. When you stay in and keep working, things are going to come back around again. You have to have faith in it because history shows that to be the case time and time again.
So I worked at Amical, and actually worked with the Amical Foundation. There, I did a lot of work with like ASE. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but that was sponsored by Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement, sponsored by the Amical Foundation. They would give me time to go work there when I worked in corporate America. And so then in 87, when the market corrected, I did exactly the opposite of what you said. I sold my stock. The day it went down, forget it. And you said, no, you hold it. So you have some discernment there.
See, this touches on something that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
When it seems like the market is telling you no.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean never. No doesn't necessarily mean never.
Yeah.
And so you're in a bad place. The market can come back.
So let's talk about that. We're going to kind of take your career story, I'm going to intermingle it, but intermingle it with mindset talk. You shared a powerful truth that says no doesn't necessarily mean never.
Right.
Can you give us an example of what you meant by that?
Working at the foundation, for example, my father, and again, another thing he told me, being precise, is you had to show him that something was worthwhile. If you wanted to implement something and he didn't really think the case was made, he would say no. But it didn't mean never, necessarily. If you came back around at a different time and changed something, maybe something is different with the organization. Maybe there's something different with the person who originally said no. Maybe they're seeing something else. Maybe their frame of mind is different. If they said no the first time, it may be yes the next time or the third time. If you have a clear vision and you've determined that something is really the right thing to do or a good thing to at least explore, it's worth plugging away. Keep trying. One no doesn't deter anyone. You hear about inventors, Bell, Edison. They failed a lot more times than they succeeded. People remember the successes. So no doesn't necessarily mean never. And if it's no from one person, maybe it's yes from someone else. Brian Epstein, the manager of the Beatles, was trying like heck in the early 60s to get them a recording contract. He kept getting no, one after another. No, we don't need these guys. They're in the wrong place. They're from Liverpool. Who are these guys? Now, Decca Records said no to them. But he ended up going and eventually got in with Parlophone, and they met George Martin, and they became the Beatles.
I think
that was
I think, if we talked about action language theory, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
A little bit, yeah.
The word no actually has a physical, it's actually your body responds. It's just like if I yelled fire, your mind would catch it, hear it, but your body would feel it.
It affects your nervous system.
Yeah, it's because in a sense, if you think about, you say that gut feeling, you hear that expression.
Yeah.
But actually, there could be thought mechanisms that are not just in the head, but in the nervous systems. But when you say no, there's the body from action language theory actually responds. What they found was this. They did a study on frogs. And these were dead frogs. They had an electrode, they put it in their heads. And so what they did was they put a shadow over their eyeballs. This frog was dead. They connected electrodes to the brain, and the shadow hit their pupil, and their tongue would go straight out. It was a muscle memory.
Yeah.
The frog was dead.
But the electric impulse was introduced into the brain.
Yes. And so a shadow went over the eyeball, and whoop, The tongue would go out and try
So
to.
the dead frog saw, so to speak, the fly.
Yeah, and react. It was in the muscle.
Fascinating.
And so a lot of times the word no, and so what I teach my team is that, first of all, Bible says, let your yeses be yeses, your nos be nos. And a lot of times we say maybe. And we don't try to operate in the maybe, right? Because you don't get any action done.
Right.
But the word yes is easy. But when you say no, a lot of people, they have a hard time saying it, hard time hearing it. And so in my team, I try to teach them, I'd say the word decline. And sometimes I'll say, hey, I decline, and and then they'll say, did you just say no to me? But it doesn't feel like the no. But that's, in a sense, what you're sharing is about, like in sales. Like, for instance, we have a sales where we place a person, a physician, so to speak. We get paid, percentage of a psychiatrist's wage, fairly high. So we've figured out that each no, we make $125 for each no. So we have to in order to make our money, we got to get all these no's.
Right.
You need about 100 no's before we get a sale. And so in a sense, that's kind of like what you're saying, or maybe how the issue of that no, how it comes across, because some people get really upset, right? They have a reaction, but it was just.
And I definitely had to deal with it in grant making.
Yeah.
It's hard to hear.
And then how do you deal with that in terms of that mindset of, that when you have to give a no to a person or.
That's right. And there's a certain way of doing it, of being clear but respectful, because you don't know at some point if you're going to have to ask them for a job, number one. But number two, sometimes you can look at someone and tell, oh, they're going places. And if they have to hear no at this point, you realize they're going to be going places where you have to say other things to them, or not have to say other things to them, but know that you're still in their corner, even though you can't help them this time.
Sure. And we basically say no now is what we usually say. So when the person says no, we'll repeat them and say no now, because it means just no, just right now.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean a no tomorrow. And
resilience, it takes resilience. It takes the maturity of being able to take that no and say, okay, now what? Do we keep going? Do we try someone else, somewhere else? Do we take a different turn? Do we stop putting so much focus on English muffins and ice cream cake roll and put it towards Japanese breadcrumbs? That was a risk for Newlyweds Foods.
Yeah, that
paid off tremendously.
That panko, right?
Yes.
I could still see it. I mean, I could see it myself in the grocery store. I'm familiar with it, right?
Yeah.
Your company introduced it. And that's always the interesting thing of how sometimes you have to say no to one thing and then move to another. Or maybe our clients
or rebalance. That's right. Keep with the times.
So I know you mentioned that was a significant thing that you learned, in that at the foundation. Now, you mentioned something else. It's creating things that you want that you see yet. Tell me about that. I know that's something you mentioned was one of the lessons that you learned there at the foundation.
The foundation and earlier, if you're working at something and you have a vision for how it can be maybe better, more efficient, more imaginative, different. The next question is, okay, how do I effectuate that change? Am I empowered to be able to do that and then work towards that? Is it maybe creating something else, like the Birmingham Art Music Alliance? At UAB, I had some opportunities to get my work performed, but not like having it done all over the city. If a certain job, if you come to a point at a certain, say, position at an employer where you're trying and you're seeing if you can build your vision, and you can tell it's just not going to happen, depending on your situation, on your family situation, on your finance situation. If you can imagine you're doing it yourself, striking out on your own, starting with your vision, and finding the right partners who will buy into it as well and help make that happen, then that's a very, very satisfying thing.
So with your dad, did you ever see moments where he would say, I could see this, when you moved from those newlywed cakes, I don't know what they would call them.
Ice cream cake roll.
Ice cream cake roll. You went into batters,
Right.
You had these multiple different. How did your dad visualize those
Some of
things?
it's serendipity, you know, Bennett. Sometimes it's, you know, things come along. My understanding from my uncle, who
Mhm.
remembers a lot of the historical things, is that they had bought a building and a company, I think, in the building that had space to put in a cake on, but they also had this machine that would grind and mix breading. Well, then the Campbell's Tomato Soup Company. Back in those days, making tomato soup was um, a thing that happened at a certain time of year because the
Mm.
harvest would come in, they'd process the tomatoes. They needed a thickening agent in order to go from tomatoes to the soup. So
Mhm.
there's actually a little bit of cracker meal there, a breader, finely ground breader. They needed someone local to be able to help them with that. Well, my grandfather said, well, okay, maybe we can make a little bit of money using this machine that's off in the corner here. They did it for Campbell's year after year. And my understanding is that was the start of the cracker meal business for Newlyweds Foods. And it ended up being the start of what is now a multinational place with, what, 20 plants.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. It's like it started out to solve a little extra problem for the client, and then it took off. It's like a byproduct type.
That's right. And it takes someone say, what if? Here's this model. Maybe I'm working in this job. Maybe I've got this company. You know, it would be great. What if X, Y, and Z were the case? And if you
Mhm.
can't get X, Y, and Z, then you have to, within that context, then maybe pivoting and saying, well, what if we started our own thing that had X, Y, and Z from the outset?
Well, and that kind of leads me to where you're at now, right? So you were at the foundation till when? And then
It
bring
was
us to speed to the present.
almost a year ago. It was June of 2024. And not to toot my horn too loud, but when I do something, I work really hard. I don't tend to be a 9 to 5 guy. I've always got things in my head. I'm always thinking. I'm working a lot. It was exhausted, and I think I was there for the foundation when I was needed the most. And it was time to hand it off. It was in a good position, good situation, the good people there. They were hiring some good people. And I wanted to start spending more time with my wife. We're empty nesters now. The kids are in college, but I wanted to be able to go off and visit them in college. I wanted to be able to go off and see this opera house. I wanted to get back to all these great works of literature that I didn't have time to read because everything was centered around do this site visit here because I've got to do this before I make a decision on that grant. And I was in charge of an awful lot. I made way more decisions on way more grants than I'd wager anyone else in the business. So anyway, I turned 60 and I was tired and I didn't want to uh, end up resenting what I was doing. So I stepped down, and then a number of people said, no, it's a shame. You really can do a lot of good. Is there a way you could do something? And so it took some thought and some discussions and a lot of rolling things around in the head, but that's where the new venture came about.
Mhm.
And so it's just getting started, but it allows me to still, in a smaller footprint, in a smaller way, and smaller amounts, help organizations in the arts and arts education just in Chicago while having the balance in my life I'm seeking from here on out to the
Work-life
end.
balance. I will tell you when my business went down 2008, we were in foreclosure. I really felt like I would lose my wife, right? Because of the stress. But I learned through Dale Carnegie years ago, Dale Carnegie's training, that to have a balanced approach on goals. They have you would have spiritual goals, financial goals, professional goals, family goals, community goals, health goals. And what I believe was that I had invested in the family goals, time, and the investment paid off when the financials weren't there. And it's important for business owners because I've seen business owners think about this. They hit the thrive level. They're moving in the abundance level, and then they lose their wife. They lose their marriage. They start drinking, or you kind of see that. And it's important to have that balance. What would you say about that for yourself? And
I spent a lot of time with grant making, going around to different places because it wasn't just Chicago, it was also on the East Coast. It was in Cleveland, it was Detroit. I was doing a lot of it. Early on, 2011 when we started it and started growing it, it meant time away from my boys, my kids and my wife. And at some point they realized as we introduced them to what the foundation did, they understood it. But it was still time away. And for me, it was time away from other things, doing creative things as a musician. Seeing the other art that's out there and seeing the beauty in different places of the world. What life balance is now is that I can do in the appropriate footprint what Pisticelli Services is asking of me. And at the same time, if, say, my husband, or not my husband, my son has a performance, he's in theater, I can go and see it during some point of its run. If my wife or my friends or my neighbors need me for something, I'd be able to do that and things won't fall apart with Pisticelli Services. It's having a little headroom. I felt like with the previous position, what I demanded of myself and what the organization really was counting on me for, I didn't have much headroom. Here, I've got headroom, I've got space, I've got time for myself, for all these other pockets.
You answered my next question, which was what practices help you maintain the peace and balance today? I think you answered that.
Did I? Practices? I don't know. There are a lot of different things in someone's life. When you're in the arts, you feel like your calling is what you do it. You go and you play these dozen piano concertos with orchestras around the world, and that's it. But for most people, that's not sustainable. It's not healthy. There's physical health, there's mental health that I think just as Americans and as a society, we're finally getting around to being able to speak openly about that, which is a long, long, long time coming. Getting rid of the stigma of all of that. There's being a member of a community. There is being able to appreciate the bird that's hopping on the branch outside your window, even if it's little doses. Doing a crossword puzzle, challenging your mind in different ways. Some people meditate,
No, it's definitely even when I was reading something silly, sitting in silence for 30 minutes at a time, and I go hunting. Surprising how folks we just feel uncomfortable just to say, "Hey, I'm just going to sit in silence for 30 minutes. Can we handle it?" And what I heard from the speaker, he said that's the best ideas come you have those moments. And so,
I'll just say this parenthetically. I saw Ringo Starr perform with his all-star band recently. Man's 84 years old and still rocking it. And people were saying, how do you do this? You look so fit. And he said, it was like four things. He was doing what he loves, not just singing his own songs, but backing other people doing their songs. Diet, he meditates, and he has, when he goes on tour, he's got a personal fitness guy who helps him do, what you can do in your 84, but he's fit and he's still out there doing it at 84. He's found that balance. He's still married with Barbara, Barbara Bach. Is it Barbara Bach? Yeah. So anyway, talk about someone who's found their balance and is still thriving.
yeah, there's a definitely process.
Yeah.
So as you're scaling, obviously you're getting firsthand knowledge now and scaling your own business. What approach to scaling would you recommend to an Art Alliance organization as they're growing to help them scale without losing the soul of the mission that they have?
Okay, it's a process. First of all, it's initiation, which is sensing and finding the need. Then it's initiating, startup process, starting to fill the need. Then it's presiding over at a steady state, being comfortable, being able to do what you're doing at a given level. Then you have to decide, all right, if I wanted to do more, what are the costs and benefits? What are the pros and cons? Do a pro and con. Would we have to take on more people? Would we have to upgrade our facilities? Would we have to hire third-party people and make the decision, all right, is our vision of this to serve this limited community or this limited area, or can you imagine it's being more? Okay? If it's yes, if you want to do more, then it's what are you willing to give up? Think about the number of hats you wear as a sole proprietor. You know this. You've been running a nonprofit. It's you got to fundraise with getting grants, donations, and so forth. Are you willing to pass that hat on to someone else so that you can think more about broad mission-related things? Are you willing to allow an accountant to do the books instead of you doing it yourself? I've seen people burn out. I've seen people run organizations that had to close because they refused to delegate. It takes a lot of trust to say, all right, I've been wearing this. I've been doing it all myself, but I'm going to pass it on to you, so that we can do that. If the answer is no, you can't imagine yourself doing that, then you're the wrong person and organization to grow. Stay where you are, frankly. There's another saying. My father used to say this: the things you own you. So you have to be comfortable with that. And if it's too big, if it's too onerous, or if it's going in a direction you don't like and you don't see yourself being in a position to change it or write it, then you really have to consider hopping off, doing something else.
So like in business, one of the things that I've learned when you're looking at those things to say, what's the closest to the bank?
Yeah.
Because in business, you can say, okay, what's the closest to bring something into the bank, right? And I wonder if that could be applied to nonprofits as to what's their value engine, right?
Mhm.
And because you could concentrate on so many things, from marketing to finance. There's all these, the strategic leadership, all these categories. But at the end of the day, there's a value that's being delivered,
Mhm.
right? And are you delivering that value? And is there a mechanism for that value to sustain the organization? That, I think, is one of the hardest parts with nonprofits.
That's right, especially with the nature of technology changing, the nature of the workplace changing, goods and services, and how they're manufactured and distributed. That's a whole complex thing.
It's easier when you have a product that you're selling, where you have a clear customer, you have a product that pops out. But imagine when you're delivering nonprofit services, the community services. It's even the whole language is different, right?
I think there's enough similarity so that it's really kind of the same ballgame. In the nonprofit sphere, let's say it's a service like concerts. Looking at a budget, you've got this much in the bank, you can put on this number of concerts with this large an ensemble. You have to pay rent for the hall. You know your capacity is this. All right. Let's say you're really good and you're talking with a Weisenheimer like me who's going to say, wow, have you thought about scaling up? What could a challenge grant do? If we had a grant that was, say, $10,000, could you match that 1-to-1 or say at 50% from other funders of new funding to have a bigger pot of money where you could have those concerts and an educational set, or twice as many concerts, or rent out a bigger concert hall, or have a bigger ensemble? Those are similar questions like I think in business or any kind of service.
But it's along the lines of value, right? It's what values can you bring to sort of your client base?
Of course. Right? Is it more or is it better? Can you make more or can you make a better thing if it takes that much more money? There's a pizza place near where we live in Washington. Pretty good pizza. It's a great neighborhood place. Fantastic location. Pretty good people. They had, decent. I'm not a pizza guy. I don't really eat pizza, which is strange coming from like a Chicagoan. But my kids love pizza. And so they would go there and they could tell when things were dropping off, when the quality of the pizza wasn't as good. And it makes me wonder, if you decided to charge an extra, I don't know, dollar or whatever it is for this pizza, in exchange have better, fresher ingredients or a thicker crust, or spend more time with that in the oven? Are you willing to make fewer units that are better? Would that be a business risk that you should make? There are equivalents all over, profit or nonprofit. Those are decisions to be made. Take the iPhone. When they were working on the iPhone, when Steve Jobs was having his people work on the iPhone, at some point he had to make the decision, is this screen good enough? And it was like a high kind of plastic. And late in the process, this is what I've read somewhere, his answer was no, it's got to be this special kind of tempered glass. Otherwise, he had a word he used, it's not good. And it meant it's being more expensive. It meant it's taking more time till they could roll it out. But then it took off. The payoff was incredible. Quality is one of those things that eventually, the cream rises to the top, and it tends to work out well if you go with quality.
Well, there's a
value, as you'd have.
There's a value matrix. I wonder if it applies here. It's that I sometimes take myself through the exercise. It goes like this: the customer wants it, the customer doesn't want it. I provide it, I don't provide it. So if I don't provide it and customer doesn't want it, that's okay, that's done, right? But if I provide
reactive.
it, right?
Sounds reactive, yeah.
Right. So if I provide it and the customer doesn't want it, then a lot of times that happens in business. We provide something that a customer doesn't want, and I'm sure that happens.
And the Edsel.
The Edsel, right. So then I provide it and the customer wants it. And then in there, you can then say, you can then kind of scale it ABC. I think that's what nonprofits have to ask. Does the customer want it and do I provide it, right?
Always have to have that there. Yes, you always do have to have that there. From my perspective, I'm a creative artist, and so I tend to start with what's been there and say, I want to go here. And that's what I'm creative. And I can either convince conductors or ensembles or organizations or the ticket buying public eventually that what's here is compelling, is at least interesting to give it a try. Or not. But you have to,
Yeah,
creative
they
people.
should try, they should experiment with it and see if there's a need, right? So you don't know if you don't necessarily provide it, but you kind of like test out the market.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of my uncle, the one in DC. He was a professional photographer and photojournalist, and he had a what if moment. He was working for the precursor to PBS and other companies, and he said, what if I were to create a company that would provide video editing that creative people could use? And at that point, the business, as I recall, was going from film to videotape. And he took a risk that videotape was the direction. This was the 70s, early 70s, and it paid off. So you can't stay in any one place too long. Then at some point it became digital stuff. And so now he's got to buy a whole bunch of computers, standalone workstations. Then it became microcomputers and buying essentially souped up Macs, big beefy Macintosh computers. Changing gears, changing how you do things, trying to see and maybe even predict where things are going. It's risky, but it's riskier still standing still because you'll be left behind. That's inevitable.
Get some final reflection on thriving. As I mentioned to you, what I do is I talk to people about transformation, which is mindset. And we talked a lot about mindset, the no's, that's really the first key of success. And then we spoke about scaling. And those elements that you mentioned, those 5 elements. And so the next one is thriving. And so when you put those 2 together, then you move to a level where you're actually bringing value to people. And as a result of that, money happens. It doesn't necessarily, you're solving someone's problems. And so when I'd like to ask you, what does thriving mean to you right now? For you personally, spiritually, professionally? What does it mean to you right now?
Being able to look at what I've done and what I'm doing and be proud enough about it to say it in a strong voice.
Okay.
If you look back at something and you're not proud of it, then what do? Well, your body language does this and you mumble, well, I'm but if you look at what you've done and what you're doing and you can talk about it and say, this is what's going on. These are our programs. This is what we've been able to do. Here are our plans. And say it with proud in a clear voice and not be self-conscious when you say it. Be glad that you're able to say this to someone and it's the truth. That's a kind of thriving that you can't measure in dollars and cents.
And you mentioned that relates to creating things that you want that you don't see yet, right? That has a kind of a connection to that.
It can be, taking the risk. Maybe not everything works out, but at least you're not looking back and saying, what if? There are 2 kinds of what ifs, right? That's what if I had done this? And then there's what if we could do this? Or what if you could accomplish that?
I think that there could be a what if I regret.
Right. Yeah. The head of Vera Creative, the local content creation person who spoke so beautifully at yesterday's Chicago Latino Arts and Culture Summit, said, what story do you want to be able to tell in 10 years' time? And that was in terms of making a decision. Let's say, and I think the example she gave was a child that goes up a ladder to a tall diving board or something at a swimming pool. And they go up and then they get scared. What if I can't do this? Well, I can pretty much do it. The question then they have to ask is, in 10 years' time, do I want to be able to tell my friends, my family, I did that dive, I did it, I went through it? Or do I want to tell them I backed down and I went back down the ladder, I couldn't do it?
It's better to try.
Yeah,
right?
unless it's something abjectly risky.
You're right. And I think that was one decision I made when I first started the business was this. I said, if I didn't start it, I was going to really regret when I was older. And I look back and I go, I really did. I was glad I tried it. Now, it wasn't easy. It cost me a lot. It would have been easier to stay the other way, but my life is so much more fulfilling.
That's great. There are some people who can be in the same job their whole life, like 30 more years. Power to them if that's really fulfilling, or if the job increases with them and changes to the point where it's always fulfilling, great. But the fact is, I heard this at some point several years ago, the average American changes jobs something like 5 to 7 times. So if most of us are honest with ourselves, at some point we're going to have to take some kind of risk. Change, grow, move. It takes some courage to do that. I'll give you another little example. When I was leaving Birmingham, I left a secure position. I was tenured. I had promotion. I was an associate professor. And people were saying, "Are you crazy? You're leaving that?" My uncle, again, this wise fellow, said, there's a kind of comfort in doing the same thing time and again. But it can be this wonderful visual image for him. It can be a velvet coffin.
Interesting.
It's comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's comfortable, but you don't realize you're limiting
Yeah.
yourself. I love that.
That's good. So if there's a nonprofit, a Art Alliance type organization that is feeling stuck right now and unsure of their calling, what would you say to them to help them find hope and to keep building?
Take a breath, see what other people are doing, look at other paradigms, find your network. And if there are directions that other organizations are going that seem like they're right and they make sense to you, there can be a light bulb moment. And then I'm going to try that. The big ocean can be scary, but staying in the same place can actually sometimes be scarier.
Right. And it's to reach out to others. I think that's the core, is to reach out to others, see what others are doing, and see, who's out there who could support the vision. Or just like I say in business, I don't have competitors. I just have folks I emulate, and those I don't.
That's right. And some people can have like a mentor, or it can become like a guru. I'm going to be just like them. I'm going to be their disciple. And if that works for them, fine. But in most cases, we aggregate from a bunch of things that we've been exposed to, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a parent, whether it's a family business. Ultimately, you have to be your own person, and you have to make those decisions on your own. Be open, be aggregating, learn as much as you can, and make the call. And don't let other people make the call. Go ahead and be influenced, be learning from those things, be informed, but then be honest, authentic with yourself, and make the decision. And good luck, and give yourself credit, especially if you've got some experience. Give yourself credit for having your experiences and knowing enough about yourselves and learning about yourself from others.
Excellent.
Make it and stick with it.
Excellent. Mikey, I want to thank you for a powerful conversation that we had today. I appreciate you taking me up on my offer and coming by to talk to me in our first kind of a podcast, face-to-face podcast. So it's quite an honor for me, truly, and to hear your story. And so you reminded us that thriving isn't always loud. It sometimes looks like legacy, service, and choosing to create what no one else could see. That's what you reminded me today. And to everyone listening, you don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to have the perfect condition. But if you got a vision and the courage to keep going, then you got a gold in your mind. That's what we were talking about.
Well put.
This is Bennett Santana. You've been listening to the Gold Mine Business Podcast. I just want to say to you, never, 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 never give up, and always build up. And I will see you the next time. Thank you so much.